Okay, folks, so today we are going to be talking about global stratification or global inequality, which is chapter 11 in your book. And hopefully by now you've already read chapter 10. But in case you haven't, I'm just going to refresh your memory on what stratification means. Well, stratification is defined as the ranking of groups based on differing levels of power and money. So global stratification is the same thing, except that instead of groups, it's countries. And I want you to kind of think about some of the countries that come to mind when you think about stratification and you think about countries in terms of being a top power in the world versus being an underdeveloped country. Usually, the old terminology that people used to use was first world, second world, third world. However, that has fallen out of favor, and the new terminology is developed, developing, or underdeveloped country. So those words have replaced first, second, and third. Anyhow, I'd like you guys to think about what a developed country is, what a developing country is, and what an underdeveloped country is. So I'm going to give you a few examples. I have the United States, I have Mexico, and Russia. Now, where do they belong? And you can pause the presentation here if you'd like, just to think about it, but I'm going to get into the answer now. So a developed nation would be the United States. A developing nation would be Mexico, and a underdeveloped nation would be Africa. Anyhow, let's get into the presentation and we can talk more about how global inequality came to be. How is it that there are people that are on the top and are considered first world powers versus the people at the bottom that are considered underdeveloped? Okay, so this entire chapter focuses on three major perspectives of global stratification. So we're going to be talking about the explanations for why some countries are on top while others remain at the bottom. And the following are the three major perspectives to explain the global divide. The first one is the rise of modernization. The second one is the legacy of colonialism. And the third one is the growth of multinational corporations. And these are all macro perspectives, which means that we are looking at the bigger picture, which is especially useful for global processes. The first explanation for this global divide, the reason why some countries are on top and others are on bottom, is the theory of modernization. So with modernization theory, they are saying that countries go through stages of development and that poor nations remain poor because they hold on to traditional attitudes, values, or beliefs that does not enable them to modernize, to come into the new technological age, the way that the United States has modernized and has dominated the global market. So modernization is defined as a far-reaching process by which nations pass from traditional forms of social organization toward forms characteristic of post-industrial revolution societies. Usually, when I'm trying to explain this concept of modernization, I do a little board exercise with my class. Now, when we talk about traditional forms of society, try to think what we mean by that. What is a traditional society? What does it look like? Take a minute to think about it. Well, a traditional form of social organization would include a society that is based on agriculture instead of on technology. So farming is big in these sort of societies. Another traditional form of society is a lot of people live in rural areas instead of in urbanized areas. So we don't have these booming metropolis cities like San Francisco or New York in traditional societies. We have very just simple forms of social organization. Not that much industry, not that much urbanization, just really simple ways of living. So that's what we mean by traditional forms of social organization. Also, trade is not done on a global level. In these sort of societies, they have like a smaller orientation, like a local orientation. They trade with one another. They don't really go outside of their group to do trade. With post-industrial revolution societies, however, it's the opposite. So what does a post-industrial revolution society look like? Like us, like the United States. We have a complex division of labor. We don't do any sort of process, of production from beginning to end anymore by one person. We divide up the labor. So I have the example of the shoemaker here on the right. The shoemaker is pretty much non-existent in our day and age. Now it's the shoemakers. We have a factory where they make the shoes, and you have all these sort of people involved in the process from beginning to end. Someone dyes the leather, someone else cuts the leather, someone else sews the leather together, someone else puts the laces on the shoe. The next person makes sure that everything looks good. So it's like an assembly line, which was created in this modern society. You also have a separation of institutions, including family, economy, government, education, and religion. So before we became a post-industrial revolution society, all of these institutions were very much intertwined with one another. We had the family who, for example, worked on the farm, and they were in charge of educating the children. They were in charge of religious instruction in the home. Also, religion had a lot of influence at the political level, and so on. So we had all these institutions sort of intertwined, but as we became a modern society, they started separating the institutions. So the family was separated from education, because once they went into the cities, they could no longer they no longer had time to instruct their children because they were busy working. So now you start to see the creation of the modern public school. And then same goes for government and religion. You see, as people become urbanized or modernized, there's a decrease in religious influence or religious authority on the government, on the political system. And as I had mentioned before, there's a decline of the local and a rise of societal or a global orientation. Pretty much, modernization opens your world up to trade with other countries, to exchange ideas, all sorts of things. And right here below, the bullet point below says decline in public religious authority. So as a country becomes modernized, you see that religious ideas, they become I guess less popular in the public sphere, like the way we have. Just think about how it used to be unacceptable to have gay people showing their affection out in public, or to even have this gay family in commercials or anything like that. But as we've become modernized, we have let go of those feelings. I wouldn't say everybody does that, but definitely we're becoming a more secular society where we try to respect other people's views, opinions, and even though it might not coincide with our religious beliefs, that doesn't matter, because in the United States, we try to respect everyone, right? We're becoming more secular. We also have the spread of cultural diversity, which comes through trading with other countries, through immigration, through technology. We are able to see all these global phenomenons going on, like dance crazes or music crazes in other countries, or K-pop, J-pop, whatever. It's spreading over here and we spread it over there. So that is what I mean by modernization. Okay, so I just want to give you guys a quick refresher. The modernization theorists say that countries go through stages of development and that poor nations remain poor because they do not modernize quickly enough. Those nations that are on top are the nations that modernized quicker. So you have nations like the United States, you have France, you have Britain, you have Australia. So those would all be examples of modern societies. And on the flip side of that, you have countries like Sierra Leone or Cambodia that have not modernized yet. They're still in the traditional form of social organization. Now, according to modernization theorists, there's the people in the middle that are transitioning right now. And those countries, such examples of that would be China and India. And right here I have pictures of the workers in China who are currently going through modernization. Now, China is considered to be a developing country, and they're considered to be developing because they're barely going through their industrial revolution, sort of the way we went through our industrial revolution during the 1800s. They're barely going through it just now. And what modernization theorists say that the transition from traditional to modern society is not always easy. They recognize that there is widespread poverty. They recognize that people are physically displaced. That means they have to move. They have to move into the city because that is where the jobs are. So they move from the farm to the city, and the adjustment could be quite difficult for some individuals. And there's plenty of exploitation because these modernizing countries, they want to attract business. They want to attract these top countries to come and invest in their country and bring their business there so that they could have work for their citizens. But there's a lot of exploitation in terms of the wages. Chinese workers make a fraction of what American workers make. There's also exploitation in terms of labor. There is no labor laws over there. There's no limits on overtime or anything of that nature. So the Chinese workers do suffer a lot. But what a modernization theorist would say is that it's necessary. It's necessary for people to go through this transition, even if it's not easy, because later people are going to lead comfortable lives, and that makes it well worth it. It's already increasing their quality of life. And to illustrate this concept of modernization and how later people lead more comfortable lives, I have visual representations of the industrial era here in the United States. So the United States Industrial Revolution went on about late 1700s all the way up to the 1900s, early 1900s. And you see pictures here of exploitation. You have kids there at the top left who are working in the factories. That's something that we had to go through, right, in order to lead comfortable lives later. You have pictures of people, the auto workers at the bottom left, who are doing the same job day in, day out. These repetitive tasks where probably they found very little satisfaction doing them, but at least they were getting a decent wage and they were able to improve their lives somehow. And then at the bottom right, I have the auto workers in the 1970s, 1980s, I'm sorry. And the reason I have this picture is because that's about the time that we started to deindustrialize. Our nation became so technologically advanced that we no longer really needed to be doing jobs like these anymore. And now we've sent these jobs overseas, and we mostly focus on the information technology type jobs, or like service related jobs, and not so much factory work. And a modernization theorist would say, see, now you guys are leading comfortable lives, you guys aren't doing these jobs anymore, other countries are taking care of these jobs for you. So that would be them proving their point. On this slide, I have a picture of journalist Leslie T. Chang. She did a TED Talk called The Voice of China's Workers. It's a video online that I would like you guys to look up. It's about 14 minutes long. I really only need you to see the first 6 or 7 minutes of it to get the idea of what she's trying to say. But Leslie T. Chang, again, she's a journalist who spent 2 years with Chinese factory workers, and she very much is in line with modernization view. When she talks about Chinese workers, she doesn't talk about them from this sort of Western standpoint of them being oppressed and exploited, but instead she looks at them as having improvements in their life. Instead of living in the rural areas, now they're living in the urban areas. They're making money, able to buy certain commodities that before wouldn't have been possible without modernization. So she sees modernization as a positive, definitely a positive. And I would love for you guys to check that video out so you can see what she says. Moving on to the second major perspective to explain the global divide, and that is colonialism. And when colonialism occurs, it's a foreign power maintaining political, social, economic, and cultural domination over a people for an extended period of time. It happened here in the US. Just think about who colonized the United States. Who were the people that were in control of the colonies? If you thought or answered the British, then you are correct. The British Crown had control over the colonies for an extended period of time until the American Revolution, when the colonial people fought back, right? The Americans fought back. It also happened in Mexico. Think about Mexico during, the 1800s. Who were the people that were colonizing Mexico? If you answered the Spanish Crown, then you are correct. And again, when we talk about colonialism, it's not just about like a political domination. It's a social, it's an economic, it's a cultural. So the people that were in Mexico at that time, for example, the indigenous people, they were converted to a different religion. They were made to live the way Spanish people lived, even though they were used to having like a tribal sort of setup. The Spanish people wanted to kind of have them lead the same lifestyle that they had led back in the mother country. And they also economically dominate the people, so they exploit them. They use them to make their country richer, like the way they did here in the US. We had all sorts of agricultural projects like cotton and tobacco, and all those projects helped enrich the British Crown, while the people here in the States were not seeing much profit from that. And when we talk about colonialism, colonial theorists often approach that theory, colonialism, from a Marxist perspective. So they compare the relationship between the colonial nation and the colonized to those between the dominant capitalist class and the proletariat. So the colonial nation is the one with power, and the colonized are the people without the power. Just like the way the capitalist class has the power, and the proletariat has little power or no power. So how does colonialism affect global inequality? Well, first we have to look at the history of colonization, and that is what we're going to do over the next few slides. I'm going to have you guys look at some maps and see how these colonial powers came to be at the end, the first world powers, the developed countries. Okay, so let's look at the colonial history of Asia. We have a map here with all the different territories held by Great Britain, Netherlands, France, the US, Russia, Japan, and then you have all the different countries there they're color coded. So if you notice, Great Britain colonized India, and then you have the Netherlands or the Dutch colonizing Indonesia at the bottom right, which are the Dutch East Indies, like Sumatra, Borneo, New Guinea. The next colonizer was France. France colonized Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. At that time, it was known as French Indochina, so they just put all three countries together, which are in pink. And then the US colonized the Philippines, Russia colonized China, like Mongolia and Outer Mongolia, and a little bit of Persia. And then finally, Japan colonized Korea. So those are the colonial powers. I want you to pay attention to those colonial powers: Great Britain, Netherlands, France, US, Russia, Japan, because they're going to come up again. You'll see. Okay, so let's move on to colonial Africa circa 1914. And you'll see all the colonizers on the left-hand key: British, French, Spanish, and so on. And then Africa is divided up by colors. So the British were in Nigeria, the Anglo-Egyptian, Sudan, Egypt, and the Union of South Africa. Then you have the French at the top left. All that red region there is French West Africa. The Spanish occupied a very small portion of the northern part of Africa there to the left. And the Portuguese were in the southern portion in Angola. And the Belge were in the Central Africa. It was the navy blue there. They were in the Belgian Congo. Germans were the green, so they're in German East Africa and also on the western side. And the Italians are in Libya and in other parts of East Africa on the right side there. So I don't know if you noticed, but there's some repeat offenders here, because we saw on the previous map that the British had already colonized parts of Asia. We also saw France in Indochina. We didn't see Spain. We didn't see the Portuguese. However, we did see the Dutch, which the Belgians and the Germans would be kind of in that whole region as well. And the new people that weren't on the previous list are the Italian and the Portuguese and the Spanish. Finally, let's have a look at colonial America. So on this key, you'll see British, Dutch, French, Portuguese, and Spanish. Now, the British were in the very top there, the British North American region, and down by Chile and Argentina in Patagonia. Then you have the Dutch in the Dutch Guianas over here in South America, the northern tip of South America. You have the French also in French Guiana, right next to the Dutch Guianas. You have the Portuguese in Brazil. You have the Spanish finally occupying most of the Americas, with the central South America region. You also have all of, or most of, North America covered by Spain. So again, let's look at some of the repeat offenders. The British Crown had already been mentioned on both of the previous slides. The Dutch also on the previous slides. The French on both previous slides. The Portuguese just on the previous slide, and the Spanish on the previous slide as well. So let's see how that all relates to colonialism, the theory. Okay, so why did I just spend the last few minutes going over the colonial history of each continent? Well, because I wanted to get to this point, to the map of the developing world. Now on this map, it's a little bit different than the previous maps. It's not, the key here at the bottom left isn't a breakdown of each of the colonial powers. Now we're just looking at the economies of each of the countries. So you have at the very top, blue, it's an advanced economy. Then baby blue is an economy that's in transition. Orange is an economy that's less developed, and red is an economy that's least developed. So just take a look at the map here. See if you see any patterns. Can you make the connection with the slides that I just finished presenting to you and this map? Do you see anything significant? Well, if you were paying attention to the previous slides, you'll see that all of the countries with advanced economies, or at least most of the countries with advanced economies, just happen to be the people that were colonizing other countries. They were the colonial powers. So you have the United States, who colonized the Philippines. You have pretty much all of Western Europe, like Spain and France and Portugal. All of those countries are in dark blue because they colonized other countries. Then at the very eastern portion of it, you see that small little blue island there. That's Japan. So from history, we know that Japan not only colonized Korea, but they also colonized China. And at the very bottom there, you have Australia. Australia is not a colonizer, but Australia, the island, was colonized by by the British. So a lot of British moved in and they pushed out the indigenous population. So they're a special case, I guess you could say. Now for the rest of the economies that are in transition and that are least developed or less developed, you'll see that those are the countries that were colonized. So like Africa had so many people, that whole continent had so many people in there trying to exert power over that area. And because of that, that's why you see some areas are really underdeveloped and others are just a little underdeveloped. Same thing with China, China and India and Vietnam and Cambodia, Laos. You see that those areas have a little bit darker red in that region, and that's because they were under colonial rule. Now Russia, they are baby blue. It could be that they're considered a developing country because at once they were a major economic power, a major political force, and now not so much. So they used to be a colonial power, and then something happened, a lot of war, a lot of within the countries in Russia, in the Soviet Union, there was too much turmoil, and that could have been the reason why that country didn't end up as an advanced economy. But yeah, you can see that the colonizers are the ones who are the most advanced. And on this slide here, I isolated the developed countries, so you can just see how the advanced economies are belonging to the people who were the colonizers. So by the 1980s, most of these global political empires had disappeared. Many colonies gained their independence. So luckily we don't have this going on, traditional colonialism going on anymore. But some colonies were not able to become entirely self-sufficient, and they depended on their colonizers for economic, social, and cultural support. This is known as neo-colonialism. So colonialism still exists, but in a different way. We don't have the country directly involved or exerting power in that area, dominating that area, but they do it in other ways. And an example of that can be seen in French Africa. And so, for example, France had colonized Africa, but when they pulled out of Africa, Africa needed their help, West Africa needed their help exporting their mineral resources, their food products. So they asked France for help, but France isn't going to do it for free. They said, sure, we'll help you, but obviously our country has to benefit from it somehow. So France became in charge of all of that, right? Of helping them in the political sphere, helping them make trade deals, even extracting their natural resources, such as diamonds or just food, even, right? Like cocoa. So they also depended on them for loans, right? The country needed to be able to buy the items they needed to extract the resources. They needed the capital, and they got it from France. Now, this relationship is seen as exploitative, the neo-colonial relationship, because France makes a profit off of Africa, and Africa sees very little money from that exchange. And this domination usually takes place through the use of multinational corporations. So it might be a big company like Nestle setting up shop in French Africa and using their labor, exploiting their people, and making profits off of it. Actually, Nestle is an American company, but I'm just giving you an example of what a multinational corporation is. Another theory that pretty much is very similar to the colonial theory is called world systems analysis. So that's why I included it on this slide. But what world systems analysis is a model of economic development that explains global inequality in terms of the historical exploitation of poor societies by rich ones. So inequality does not exist because people did not modernize quickly enough, right? They didn't come into the new age quickly enough. This is a theory that says that rich nations have only become rich because others have become poor. They have enriched themselves by exploiting other nations. And so how do they exploit them? Well, for one, poor nations provide cheap labor. You have France that is able to get their cocoa or their diamonds or their precious metals for their technology from Africa for a very low cost because they live in a very poor, desperate society that is willing to work for, let's say, 3 pennies, 3 pennies instead of $9 an hour. And then the other thing about world systems analysis, they say that the lower income nations provide a vast market for these industrial products sold by corporations based in rich countries. The best example that I could give you is Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola, even though they are based in the US, they are a global company, and this global company is able to sell its product, Coke, to people all around the world, even the most poor people. Actually, in some nations in Africa, Coke is actually cheaper than water. So many of the citizens end up buying Coke instead of water, right? Soft drinks are usually a lot cheaper. So let's go into world systems analysis a little bit more on the next slide. Okay, so let's refresh your memory on what systems analysis is. The world systems analysis is defined as a view of the global economic system as being divided between nations that control wealth and nations from which resources are taken. Also, under the world systems analysis, it's very difficult for a nation to develop, especially when they owe high amounts of debt to the core nations. The way that Africa owes high amounts of debt to France. Well, the theorist for this theory, his name is Emanuel Wallerstein, he believed that all countries are divided into a three-tier hierarchy. You have your core, your semi-periphery, and your periphery. Now, your core nations, which are Canada, France, Germany, Japan, UK, US, those are like your first world nations, your developed countries. Them and their corporations control and exploit the non-core nations' economy. Non-core refers to semi-periphery and periphery nations. So non-core puts those two categories together. And the core nations are at the top, and they're able to extract material resources and labor from those less developed countries. And these countries, the core nations, also have control over the world and world trade and economic agreements. Now, the peripheral countries, which are the ones at the very bottom, are usually indebted to the core countries, so both their lands and populations are exploited. And this hierarchy that you see here helps explain why core countries have a higher standard of living than periphery and non-periphery nations. They only have a higher standard of living because they're not, the wealth is concentrated in those countries, it's not spread evenly. It's the way that the modern class system looks here in the US. You have the people at the very top, the upper class, having so much and the rest having so little. And that's the only reason. The reason that the upper class is able to live so comfortably is because they're not being regulated, right? In terms of our economy, they are allowed to have an unlimited amount of wealth, while for the bottom portion of our population, we can't even hire our minimum wage. We can't even fight for a higher minimum wage, and we're living in very destitute conditions. The last perspective that explains the global divide is the growth of multinational corporations. So, what is a multinational corporation? That's a commercial organization that's headquartered in one country, but it does business around the world. And I have a picture of multinational corporations. At the bottom left, you see the McDonald's logo, the Google logo, the Coca-Cola, Yahoo, um, Apple, Starbucks. And then at the right, the bottom right, you see the oil companies like Shell, ExxonMobil, Chevron, British Petroleum. And the issue with these multinational businesses is that they're so powerful because they make so much money. They have a revenue that's on par with entire countries. For example, ExxonMobil, the petroleum company, they make about $452,926,000 per year, while Argentina makes about 446 million. So the ExxonMobil makes more money, right, more profit than Argentina's entire GDP. Now, what's the issue with that? With having so much money, a corporation having so much money, is that money gives them a pretty much not unlimited amount of power, but an excessive amount of power, because these multinational corporations can violate, for example, environmental laws, because they have so much money that if they violate or break a rule, they can just pay to get it settled. Like the way British Petroleum had that massive oil spill in the Gulf area, and how they took a long time to respond to it, and because of that, a lot of wildlife was affected, as well as people that lived on the beach cities in the Gulf area, like Louisiana. A lot of Louisiana people were affected by the Gulf spill. Or you got corporations like Walmart or Nike that manufacture their items overseas, and that when the workers in these underprivileged, underdeveloped countries start complaining, right, and saying, well, we need better hours, we need better pay, we need safer conditions, these companies threaten to leave those areas. They say, well, if you keep asking us to make your work conditions better, we're just going to leave. Instead of the company responding by making the work conditions better, they'd rather leave to another country where they can exploit the people even further. And so some of these countries like China that have been trying to change their labor laws and make it more more in the workers' advantage or to the workers' benefit, they haven't been able to, because these multinational corporations keep threatening them that if they do, they'll leave. Because if they change labor laws, that means that the multinational corporation has to start paying more. And it really comes down to money with these corporations. It's all about profit. They're not a humanitarian corporation, right? They're not trying to change the world, make positive change for humans. They're trying to make money. That's all they're trying to do. Okay, so how would a modernization theorist see the multinational corporation? So a modernization theorist would see the relationship between multinationals and the developing countries as being beneficial. Sure, there's exploitation in China. Sure, there's exploitation in Mexico. But now they have industries and jobs that would not have otherwise been there. They're also promoting rapid development in those areas. Mexico is urbanizing because of the jobs that are there. They're able to modernize a little bit quicker. There's a growing middle class in China. These are all the positives. And it's also facilitating the exchange of ideas and technology, making the world more independent. So manufacturers are going over there and sharing their skills or their production techniques, and they're teaching the citizens something that they otherwise would not have known. I want you folks to watch this video called Made in China. It is a little 15-minute endeavor into the modern globalization system and the modern production system. If you look it up on Google, it is Ted Koppel, and then put Made in China. So how would a conflict theorist see the multinational corporation? How would a Marxist see it? Well, they see the multinational corporation as creating dependency. They say that they exploit local workers to maximize profits, so it's not a good thing. The multinational corporation going into these underdeveloped countries is not a good thing. For one, cheap foreign labor is bad for the industrialized country labor in the form of job losses. Now, hopefully you all saw the video that I told you to watch in the previous slide. But if you didn't, the video shows people here in the United States losing their jobs when an American company decides to relocate into China. It's Briggs and Stratton's lawnmower company that decides to do all their business and their labor over in China now. And you have all these employees that are affected because of that. People who thought they were going to retire with that company are now no longer able to retire comfortably because the company's moving. So now you have, there's a female that's represented in that video who has to pretty much start all over again. She's in her 50s and she was hoping to retire, and she can't because she has to start all over again and look for another job. But it's kind of hard because this lady's in her 50s and she doesn't have any other skills aside from working in that industry. And as you know, those jobs are just not available anymore. They're all moving overseas. The other way that the cheap foreign labor is bad is that developing nation or that underdeveloped nation has this climate of investment that makes it so that there's these it's harder to make labor laws in that country. So because China wants people to come in, all these industrialized countries to come in and invest and put all their businesses there, they'll say, oh, don't worry, come over here. We don't have any sort of minimum wage, or we don't have any set like work hours or vacation pay or anything like that. So you come over here, you're going to save a lot of money. But the thing is that to keep those multinational corporations in that country, you have to keep exploiting your people, pretty much saying, no, we're not going to make any labor laws, we're not going to make unions because we want you to stay here. So those working conditions will never improve. And when you try to make those improvements, the multinational corporation will just try to go to another country. The other point I wanted to make was that the investment by the multinationals initially contributes to the host nation's wealth, but eventually increases economic inequality within the developing nations. So what that says is pretty much when the multinational corporation first sets up in China, it's a good thing because Chinese people will be able to have a job. So you might employ like hundreds, if not thousands, of people in your factory, and that helps out China in the beginning. But eventually, it'll increase the economic inequality between China and the United States because China's never going to get out of that position. They're always going to be underpaid because if they say no, we don't want to work for 20 cents an hour, then the multinational corporation will say, okay, well, we'll find a company, not a company, but a country that is willing to work for that wage. Okay, so this slide here shows you the minimum wages around the world. You'll see Australia has $16.88. The United States is $7.25. You have Hong Kong at $3.87. China with 80 cents. The India with 28 cents. And finally Sierra Leone, which is in Africa, with 3 cents. Now I'm showing you this slide because I want to illustrate the concepts or the drawbacks of having a multinational corporation in your country. So there's this so-called race to the bottom among these countries that rank low in the global economic system. Now the basic method of this race to the bottom is to offer lower prices than the competition so that you can attract these multinational corporations like Nike or like Walmart. So those nations like in Mexico or Philippines or India or Sierra Leone, they reduce costs by offering citizens a lower wage, poorer working conditions, and longer hours. And whoever has the lowest price wins. And the multinationals end up setting up in those countries until they are undercut by another country. So China is at 80 cents right now. If one of these multinationals was to say, you know what, I don't really want to do my business in China anymore, I'd rather just go to India where it's 28 cents, then Chinese people can either decide that they want to take that bet and reduce their wages, or they can say, no, that's fine, go to India. But then once they get to India, they could say, well, Sierra Leone could do it for 3 cents. Can you lower your price? So these countries will adjust to whatever the multinational corporation is asking them to adjust to sometimes. Now, China isn't as low as Sierra Leone, but it just depends on what region of the country you're talking about and, what exact item are they making and so on. And so the countries that become the multinational favorites remain at or near the bottom. So China isn't going to go up to $7 anytime soon, because if they do, the multinational corporation is not going to do business with them. So they need to keep their wages low for an indeterminate amount of time. We never know when they're going to be able to hire their wages. Maybe it's after they become more modernized and they're able to kind of be self-sustaining, but who knows when that'll happen. So this is the end of the presentation. If you like, just have a read over this slide. There's some very good statistics on